On the afternoon of March 24, 2006, a young man named Kenneth Countie was driven to a hardware store in Epping, New Hampshire by his girlfriend to pick up several gallons of accelerant, and for reasons no one who saw him that day would understand until much later, he was the only person who didn't know he wasn't going to leave that farm alive. If you're drawn to cases where the most dangerous person in the room is the one offering to take care of you, subscribe to Untold Record. This is exactly what we do here. Sheila LaBarre was 48 years old and lived alone on a small horse farm at the end of a long dirt driveway in rural New Hampshire. She had moved to the area years earlier from Alabama and had built a quiet life that, from the outside, looked exactly like what people in small towns expect from a single woman who keeps to herself. She owned animals. She kept her property gated. She rarely went into town. The few neighbors who lived nearby describe her as polite but distant. What the neighbors did not see was the steady stream of vulnerable young men who came in and out of that farm. Sheila had a pattern. She would meet men through personal advertisements, through chance encounters in nearby towns, and occasionally through mutual contacts. The men she chose were not random. They were almost always young. Many had cognitive disabilities. Many came from broken homes or unstable living situations. Many were drifters or men in transitional periods of their lives with no close family checking in on them. She would offer them a place to stay. She would tell them she needed help around the farm. She would tell them she cared about them. And once they were on the property, they tended not to leave. By early 2006, the man living with her was 24-year-old Kenneth Countie. Kenneth had cognitive challenges and had been living on his own with limited support before he met Sheila. He had been at the farm for several months. His mother, who lived several hours away, had begun to grow concerned about how his behavior had changed since moving in with her. He had stopped calling. He had stopped visiting. The few times she did manage to speak with him on the phone, he sounded confused. He sounded scared. He sounded smaller than the son she remembered. In the weeks leading up to his death, several people in Epping had noticed something was wrong with Kenneth. He was seen at a local grocery store walking behind Sheila using a shopping cart for support. He could barely stand. His skin showed visible signs of injury. He was wearing clothing that did not fit him. He did not speak. He did not make eye contact. He simply followed her quietly through the aisles like a child afraid of being left behind. A clerk at the store grew concerned enough to call the local police. Officers responded and spoke briefly with Sheila and Kenneth in the parking lot. Sheila explained that Kenneth had recently fallen and had been ill. Kenneth nodded along to everything she said. Without a direct statement from him indicating he was being harmed, the officers had no legal basis to remove him from her care. They let them leave together. That was the last time anyone outside of the farm would see Kenneth Countie alive. A few days later, on the afternoon of March 24th, Sheila drove him to a hardware store and purchased several gallons of accelerant along with cleaning supplies. The store clerk would later describe Kenneth as appearing barely conscious during the visit. He sat in the passenger seat of her vehicle and stared straight ahead the entire time. They drove back to the farm. By the next morning, a thick column of black smoke was rising from a fire pit on the property. Neighbors who had grown accustomed to occasional burning on the farm initially thought nothing of it. Sheila kept livestock and frequently burned debris. The fire burned for hours. Then it burned for most of a full day. On the morning of March 26th, after a separate welfare check request had been filed by Kenneth's mother, local police officers walked onto the farm and approached the fire pit. What they found in the ashes would become the centerpiece of one of the most disturbing prosecutions in New Hampshire's history. The remains in the pit were partial. They had been subjected to such intense heat for such a long duration that initial identification was nearly impossible. Investigators had to rely on dental fragments and small pieces of bone that had survived the burn. Eventually, the remains were identified as Kenneth Countie. Sheila was not on the property when officers arrived. She had taken her vehicle and her dogs and had left the state. A multi-state search began. While investigators processed the farm, they began to uncover something even darker than what they had already found. It would turn out that Kenneth was not the first young man who had disappeared from Sheila's farm. A year earlier, In 2005, another young man named Michael Deloge had been living with Sheila at the same property. Michael had also been vulnerable. Michael had also been isolated from his family. Michael had also stopped calling home, stopped visiting, and stopped being seen in town. His family had reported him missing in 2005. The case had never been solved. When investigators searched the farm in 2006, they found additional remains scattered across the property. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to Michael Deloge. He had been murdered at the farm nearly a year before Kenneth, and his death had gone completely undetected. 2 men. Same farm. Same woman. Same pattern. Both of them had trusted her enough to live with her. Both of them had been cut off from their families. Both of them had ended in the same fire pit. Sheila was apprehended several days later in Massachusetts. She did not resist arrest. At her trial in 2008, Sheila pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. She claimed that the men she had killed were demons or pedophiles and that she had been carrying out a divine mission. The jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted her of first-degree murder in the death of Kenneth Countie. She had previously pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of Michael Deloge. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated in New Hampshire. And sometimes the most haunting cases aren't the ones where strangers cross paths in the dark. They're the ones where someone opens their door, invites you inside, and you mistake the silence of that farm for safety. If you're drawn to cases that still echo long after they're closed, subscribe to Untold Record. There's always another file waiting to be opened.